I just wanted to try my very first portrait in oil pastels, and since that wasn't enough of a challenge, I also decided I would use only 3 colors without cheating by considering black and white don't count. What happened first was I picked the colors I thought I wanted to use: blue, red, and yellow. These 3 are primary colors, and with them, you're supposed to be able to achieve all kinds of colors. There's a recipe using these 3 that I normally use with watercolors to create natural skin tones, and it never fails, it really works. However, I had no clue what this was gonna look like for oil pastel, so I decided to test them out on my Clairefontaine Paint-On Mixed Media paper, which is the paper I like to use for my oil pastel works. Right away, I realized it would be very hard to mix these into a skin tone. The colors were overpowering each other with each new layer. Once yellow, then red, and at that point, I didn't even continue on with blue. This is when I decided to change colors. I was sitting there with my camera filming for this video, so I hesitated a little bit knowing I had only 3 colors to choose from in my set. The idea of an oil pastel portrait painting was entirely new and really challenging because oil pastels are so thick and realistic portraits require precision, but also because of the colors, picking the right ones and mixing them well to achieve something that looks realistic. The portrait I wanted to draw was mostly pinkish skin and a dirty blonde tone for the hair. So first I went for the most obvious color for a skin tone, this light pink. Then I found the green color, olive brown, that looked like it might help me get the dirty blonde tones from the hair. This color is dark enough that I knew it might also serve as a good color to build up shadow, so this was a strategic choice designed to get me the hair color but also the shadows. I tried several shades of yellow to complete my palette, but it didn't look good and I was missing a very light tone for the highlights anyways, so I ended up ditching yellow and choosing white as my last color. Another strategic choice is white is always going to be best for highlights and it can also make any color look lighter. This is how I ended up getting into this portrait painting with 3 odd colors for our expectation of a realistic portrait. To start an oil pastel painting like this, I went with my usual supplies because they work very well for my oil pastel landscapes, and I was confident it would be the same for a portrait. I'm talking about the mixed media Clairefontaine paper I mentioned earlier, some masking tape to prevent the paper from moving around, Caran d'Ache Nail Pastel 2, which are high quality oil pastels, and paper towels as well as blending stumps that I like to use for blending. If you need precise references, you will find the link for all these in the description of this video. I drew a sketch of the woman I wanted to paint, and because of the light pink, I used a netted eraser on top of the line art to make sure it doesn't come through in places, even though usually pencil marks are not an issue with oil pastel since they're so opaque. To approach a portrait painting, normally I will apply a base color everywhere, then work in layers and build up shape. Here I had almost no idea what I was doing, so I decided to work on one section at a time to see what the colors really looked like and how capable I was to build a face from scratch with oil pastels. I went with my usual layering technique, which is to cover each area in the painting with the tone that we see the most of in an area. Then I make it either lighter or darker with the other colors. For example, here the cheek is neither very light nor very dark, so I used the mid-tone, my pink oil pastel, first, and in these places where the cheek is a tad lighter, I layered white to create a lighter shade of pink. For blending, I used a paper towel, only to realize later that for some areas of the face, I prefer blending stumps because they're more precise. I think paper towels are always great with oil pastels, but they work better on large surfaces like a background painting, and they work well to smooth something out better than a blending stump. I would normally keep going like this all over, but I had to see how the green looked like for shadows. The other reason for adding green so early is because there were a lot of key pencil lines I didn't want to cover up with the pink or white colors, so I found it more convenient to have them outlined with green right away since I knew I'd be building up shadows there later. At this point, because that green shade didn't look so bad in a portrait, I was feeling confident and started getting bolder, and I defined all of the key areas in the top part of the face. When you create realistic work, and even better, when you create realistic work with only 3 colors, I learned you have to be very mindful of keeping the highlights very light and shadows very dark, especially because here, having black or brown to make shadows darker in places would have made my life easier in that moment, but I knew wasn't an option. For highlights, no matter what you paint with oil pastels, always be careful to apply white and white only where those strong highlights show, here on the nose ridge, for instance. To blend white when it's supposed to stay white, it helps use something for just that, so it doesn't get all muddy from other colors. For me, it's one tip of my blending stump that I'll keep for white and light colors, and the other tip I keep for darker tones. Sometimes I wipe the tip on a paper towel if I need to clean it up. Another tricky part of this oil pastel portrait painting are details like the nostril. You want to use the edge of your oil pastel to make sure and keep the color where it needs to be, because with such thick sticks, it's easy to draw outside a line and make the nostril bigger, which would change the whole outcome. I kept going with the lips, then the chin, and I was pretty pleased with how it was going so far, although from the beginning I wasn't sure I got my proportions entirely right. I knew they were quite accurate, but maybe not 100%, and that's something I'm looking at improving with my skills. I didn't use a ruler, I did everything by hand on observation, and that's the result I'm getting at this point. As a result, I struggled a bit with the chin and finally moved on to painting the hair. Hair can seem really tricky with all paintings and drawings. It's such a mess, and what about all the colors? How can we work them into this mess? To be honest, I wasn't quite sure for oil pastel with this first portrait. I've done plenty of hair drawings and paintings before, but here the problem is the strokes are so thick, and personally I like to smooth out oil pastels rather than having texture show, so this was challenging in the first seconds of approaching the hair painting. I decided to paint some kind of first layer first, using my 2 chosen hair colors, green and white. Green for the shadow, white for the highlights, and a mix of both for the dirty blonde color. I didn't see a use for the pink color here. It made no sense here to use a blending stump either, so I went in directly with a paper towel to smooth everything out. Remember to always go for lighter areas first, then the dark tones, so the dark parts don't contaminate the light parts. I must say I was pretty surprised about the color turning like the blonde one I was going for. I expected something acceptable for a hair color, but in fact the blonde shade I was looking for really comes through. I added a few highlights and kept refining little areas in the face, knowing the most interesting part in realistic painting and drawing is always for last with final details and highlights. Before moving on to painting the detail, I'd like you to type in portrait fan here in the comments section of the video if you made it till here and if you're enjoying this. I added the eyelashes so the portrait is complete and struggled some more with the chin. With portrait, the tricky thing is when you change one small thing 1 inch. It changes everything. I started adding more highlights to define the lips and cheeks. Later, I used the oil pastel like a pen to add lines and texture to the lips. With highlights in portraits, whether it is oil pastel or anything else, you always want to make sure there are strong ones on key areas like the forehead, the eyes, nose, lips, chin, cheekbones. So before moving on, check on that. I thought the hair needed more texture, so I drew wavy curls, and I even used a technique I like and came up with a while ago. I used my ruler to scrape some of the pastel off with a sharp edge. Like I said before, I like my painting smooth, so I blended it all again, but very lightly this time. I didn't press a lot, and I blended in the direction the hair goes. I had added a few flyaway hair showing on the face before. That's super important in making the art look more realistic. As you can see, not only can you paint realistic portraits with oil pastel, but it's possible to do it with very few and very strange colors too, even if at first you're terrified and unsure. And you can get better and better at it. That's what I'm leaning towards myself. Now, if you don't own high quality oil pastels like mine, you might be wondering if cheaper oil pastel can get you that kind of result. And I have the answer to that in the video that I made comparing expensive Caran d'Ache oil pastels with cheap Pentel oil pastels. So I would encourage you to watch that next. I know it will give you a boost of confidence to create with what you have.